I invited my stepson David to give it a try. He was taken aback. Genuine account. I encountered David 5 years back, and from the instant our eyes met, I found myself believing in love once more. He possessed a captivating charm, a gentle kindness, and embodied all my deepest desires. Upon his introduction of his son, Ryan, I sensed that our connection held a genuine significance. At just 15, Ryan was a polite and reserved young man, yet he carried himself with a sense of respect. I entered their lives with care, resolved to tread lightly, yet as time passed, we grew into a family. David had a way of making me feel truly cherished. Our abode resonated with joy, hearty meals, and conversations that stretched into the night. He grasped my hand in public, tucked sweet notes in the kitchen, and always leaned in for a kiss before heading off to work. Every part of me was convinced I had discovered the kind of love that inspires countless stories. I invested my soul into our union, ensuring that David and Ryan had all that they required. As Ryan matured, our connection strengthened. He would join me in the kitchen as I prepared meals, seeking my thoughts on school, friendships, and the journey of life. He was more than just my stepson. He turned into a companion, a person who placed their trust in me. I never had children of my own, but with Ryan, I never sensed that emptiness. Gradually, subtle shifts began to unfold. David frequently put in late hours. His trips for work grew more frequent. His affection turned into a habit, mechanical and obligatory. Initially, I overlooked it. Every relationship experiences its own stages, I reminded myself. I found myself justifying his actions, persuading myself that it was the stress that caused it all. He remained on his way home, continued to occupy his seat at the dinner table, and kept sending me texts throughout the day. Yet, there was an absence that lingered. One evening, I crafted his favorite meal, creamy pasta, the dish he always claimed tasted better when I prepared it. I aimed to catch him off guard, to evoke memories of what we once shared. As I arranged the table, Ryan entered the kitchen. His face was taut. "I have something to share about Dad," he said, his voice wavering slightly. I found my hands immobilized, as if encased in ice. His voice was tentative, wavering, as if he were weighing the decision to speak at all. "What is it, Ryan?" she asked. He shifted with a sense of unease. I spotted him in the company of another person. My stomach clenched. "What do you mean by that?" Ryan paused for a moment, then let out a long breath. "A lady. In a dining establishment. More than once." The words lingered in the atmosphere, heavy and toxic, like a creeping venom. I wished to chuckle, to brush it off as a simple mix-up. The way Ryan gazed at me, a mix of guilt, sympathy, and anger swirling in his expression, caused my heart to plummet. "Are you certain?" My voice emerged more feeble than I had hoped. He gave a slight nod. "Indeed." The space seemed more confined. I gazed at the plates arranged on the table. The meal that unexpectedly churned my stomach. David simply wouldn't. He wouldn't jeopardize all that we've created. Ryan tentatively rested a hand on my shoulder. "I wanted to bring this to your attention." I nodded, forcing down the lump in my throat. "Thank you very much." He turned and left, leaving me rooted in place, clutching a serving spoon as if it were a heavy anchor. I convinced myself that Ryan might have been wrong. Perhaps it was a business meeting, or perhaps it was just inconsequential. Yet, beneath the surface, a fracture emerged. That evening, as David returned home, I observed him closely. He welcomed me with a kiss on the cheek, a casual smile, the same man I had cherished for years. Yet now, a shadow loomed over him, a heaviness in his movements that I had never observed before. I sat opposite him at the dinner table, observing how he twirled his fork, how he spoke without truly meeting my gaze. I longed to confront him directly, to insist on the truth. Yet I found myself unable to do so. Instead, I paid attention. He shared details of his day, discussing work and expressing just how exhausted he felt. In that instant, clarity washed over me. It wasn't what he said. It was how he sidestepped specific details, the way his voice felt cold when he uttered my name. I acknowledged everything with subtle nods, feigning ignorance to the tremors that danced beneath the table. That night, as he lay next to me, I found myself gazing at the ceiling, my thoughts circling through each moment of our marriage. Every "I love you," every promise made, every glance that once radiated affection. I had been unaware. Or perhaps I had decided to be. Sleep eluded me that night. My thoughts wouldn't settle, echoing Ryan's words repeatedly. Unease coiled within me, yet the voice of denial softly insisted that another explanation must exist. I promised myself I wouldn't leap to assumptions. I required evidence. The following morning, David leaned in to kiss me goodbye as he always did, but for the first time, I didn't return the gesture. Once he was gone, I immediately grabbed his phone. It was secured tightly. He never locked it. My hands were icy as I gazed at the screen. He was concealing something. I needed to discover an alternative path. I began to observe his routine closely, noting the nuances in his expressions as he spoke. There existed minor details, fleeting pauses, ambiguous justifications. The manner in which he held his phone near the person I had once confided in completely transformed into an unfamiliar face. That evening, I reviewed our phone bill records online. My heart raced as I sifted through the digits he had been reaching out to the most. A single number kept surfacing late at night, during lunch breaks, and even on weekends. My stomach churned as I realized what it was. Lisa. My closest companion. I gazed at the screen, breath caught in my throat. It seemed like a harsh prank, a haunting dream from which I couldn't escape. Lisa, the woman who had been a constant presence in my life for years, the one with whom I shared my deepest secrets. The person who had occupied my kitchen, sharing laughter over coffee. I remained composed. Not at this moment. I had to confirm my certainty. In the days that followed, I observed him with greater scrutiny. His justifications began to meld into one another. Staying late to finish up meetings at the 11th hour. Unforeseen tasks. Every falsehood piled upon the previous one, until they transformed into a delicate structure poised on the brink of falling apart. On Friday night, he mentioned that he had a business dinner planned. I smiled, nodded, and observed him as he exited through the door. Once he left, I snatched my keys and went after him. I parked a few blocks from the restaurant he had mentioned. My fingers clutched the steering wheel tightly. My heart raced as I surveyed the entrance. Time slipped away. And so they appeared. David and Lisa. Perched by the window, leaning in, sharing laughter. His hand lightly grazed hers. Their eyes met with an intensity that sent a flutter of unease through me. I raised my phone and captured the image. My hands shook, yet my thoughts remained sharp. I departed before they could catch a glimpse of me, navigating the road in quietude. My mind ensnared in a web of fury and sorrow. When I finally arrived home, a sense of emptiness washed over me. I gazed into the mirror, seeking the woman I once recognized. The individual who held faith in love, in trust, in eternity. She was absent. Ryan discovered me in the shadows, my phone clutched in my hand. Initially, he remained silent. He simply sat next to me, biding his time. I angled the phone in his direction, revealing the image to him. His jaw tightened, fists balling up in response. Apologies escaped his lips in a soft murmur. I shook my head. You need not be. For the first time since this began, I allowed myself to weep. Not only for the betrayal, but for the love I had lost without even realizing it. I spent the night wide awake, I lay awake, gazing at the ceiling, my thoughts racing through countless possibilities. Facing him at this moment would merely result in deception, justifications, and partial truths. I wanted him to experience the emotions I had. To witness everything fall apart just as I had seen it unfold. Thus, I devised a plan. The following evening, I prepared his favorite meal once more. I carefully measured each ingredient, pouring every ounce of my anger and heartbreak into the process. The house exuded a comforting warmth, a stark and painful contrast to the tempest brewing within me. As David entered, a smile graced his face, blissfully oblivious to his surroundings. Ryan sat opposite him, quiet. I presented the food with great care, ensuring that every detail was flawless. David spun his fork, lost in thought until my voice broke through. Ryan experienced the initial flavor. David's hand became immobile. Ryan paused, glancing back and forth between us, feeling the gravity in my tone. "Go on," I urged, my eyes fixed intently on David. Ryan grasped his fork, yet just as he was about to take a bite, I leaned in closer. "I flavored it with the same fabrications your father shared with me." The room fell into a hush. David's fork slipped from his fingers, creating a sharp clatter against the plate. His face drained of color as he gazed at me, understanding seeping in like a gradual toxin. I retrieved my phone and set it down on the table, the screen illuminating with the image I had captured. His lips parted, a quest for words unfolding, yet silence lingered. He gazed at Ryan, whose expression was a blend of fury and disillusionment. "How much time?" My voice remained calm, yet within me a storm of anxiety brewed. David gulped. "It's not as you perceive." I released a sound that echoed emptily. "Is that so?" "So what is it, David? A business meeting? Is it merely a coincidence? An error?" He averted his gaze. That was precisely the response I required. Ryan set his plate aside, his jaw clenched. "I admired you," he said, his voice cutting through the air with a sting of betrayal. "I stood up for you." David extended his hand towards him, yet Ryan recoiled. "Refrain." The burden of his son's disappointment felt more profound than any words I could have uttered. I stood, my chair scraping against the floor. "I shall remain silent. I shall not plead. I need you to understand that you shattered something genuine." "And for what purpose?" David found himself at a loss for words. The man who had once been my entire world now appeared diminished, stripped down to mere guilt and regret. I glanced over at Ryan. "You are not obligated to remain here this evening." He nodded, rising to his feet in silence. I stepped outside, leaving David behind at the table, gazing at the meal that no longer held any appeal for him. I left that night and never glanced back. There was no grand departure, no last attempt for clarity. I had poured my heart into a man who discarded it without a moment's hesitation. Remaining would have required embracing the falsehoods, feigning that affection could endure treachery. Wasn't able to. The following morning, David made a call. I allowed it to ring. He then sent a message, expressing his regrets and stating that a conversation was necessary. All words had been exhausted. Apologies do not eliminate deceit. Remorse does not restore faith. Ryan spent a few days with me. He remained silent, reflecting on his inner feelings. His father was his guiding light, the figure he looked up to with great admiration. Now that vision was broken. At last, one night, he found his voice. "I don't understand. What drives individuals to harm those who care for them?" I found myself without a response. Perhaps David believed he could evade detection. Perhaps he assured himself that it wasn't a significant matter. Perhaps he never really felt for me as deeply as I felt for him. But the reason no longer held any significance. Only the truth prevailed. I shared with Ryan a lesson I wished I had discovered earlier. Affection goes beyond mere emotions. It revolves around decisions. True love is honest, loyal, and never makes you doubt your value. He nodded, grasping the concept in a manner he had never experienced previously. The pain of his father's betrayal ran deep within him. However, it also revealed to him the type of man he would never aspire to become. David continued to make attempts to connect. He appeared at my door one time, his eyes weary, seeking an opportunity to clarify. I allowed him to speak, yet his words seemed devoid of substance. He admitted that he had erred, that he continued to hold feelings for me. He was afraid of losing what we shared. I gazed at him and sensed emptiness. Affection had given way to a chillier sensation, understanding. "You've already lost it," I remarked. He departed. And that marked the final moment I beheld him. I learned from some mutual friends that Lisa is also no longer involved. Their possessions were not worth the havoc they unleashed. Letting go was a challenge, yet it was essential. Suffering calls for acknowledgement, yet it imparts valuable lessons. I discovered that love must never come at the expense of self-respect. The one who genuinely cares for you will never place you in a situation where you question their feelings. Ryan and I maintained our connection. He forged his own journey, more resilient and insightful. One day, he reached out to me with a message. "Thank you for revealing the true essence of love to me. I refused to accept anything but the best." And that sufficed. Deceit had taken away so much. However, it had not stripped away my power to make my own choices. Ultimately, that was the most significant triumph.